Hello, all, and thanks for joining us today with TBC Talks Tech and our continuing series of technology webinars. I'm your host, Jim Nedved, a 25-year veteran of IT and TB Consulting's Director of Delivery Services. I want to start off by introducing you to our panel of experts today as we discuss leveraging IT to accelerate mergers and acquisitions. First, we have Eric Marshall. Eric is our dedicated solution architect that helps clients define a strategic vision. With a background of 20 plus years in the industry, he has guided large companies and enterprises in excess of $1 billion to successful digital transformations. Welcome, Eric. We've also got Justin Juergens on the panel today. Justin is our client delivery architect who has performed numerous infrastructure consolidations from large and sprawling environments into compact, lean, virtualized cost savings environments. He continues to help TBC's portfolio of clients through security compliance engagements and improvements of their security posture. We've also got Steve Walker joining us today as our moderator. Steve brings more than a decade of experience in thought leadership and executive level IT business development for TB Consulting as our Director of Key Accounts. His intimate knowledge of IT and proficiency at communicating with executives across the various industries allows him to identify pain points within companies and work together to find solutions. Welcome to all of our panelists. Our agenda for today is solid. We're going to start off with an introduction to some M&A current trends. Then we'll move over to an expert panel discussion. And finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A as well as an invitation to invite all of our listeners to connect to a follow-up discussion. So let's dig into it. M&A trends. So we all know the coronavirus has had a continuing effect on the material global impact of mergers and acquisitions. On a massive scale and in a very short period of time, over hundreds of thousands of businesses have been shuttered or cut back, or operations just significantly impacted. Millions of workers have been laid off or furloughed, consumer spending has been drastically reduced, supply chains have been disrupted, and demand for oil and other energy resources has plummeted. But there's hope on the horizon, as the M&A world has endured and recovered from past economic crises, including the burst of the dot-com bubble that you can see in the graph in 2000, 2002, the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, and in past financial and economic crises. Uncertainties, while they are to be expected, they are temporarily, and we will bounce back. So this time things are a little bit different though, right? So the impact of the pandemic is not just on financial systems generally, but the valuation of sellers and the appetite of buyers to get deals done in the short term, but also multiple of other factors that are impacting them. So in terms of the deals themselves, the M&A deals, there's new due diligence issues that are arising, especially around the IT space. The manner in which this due diligence is conducted, the availability, the pricing, the other terms of deal financing, and the time it takes to just do the necessary or meet necessary regulatory obligations and other third-party approvals of transactions. We'll get into some more of that later in the show. Now, moreover, unlike other crises that have affected M&A deals and activity, this time there's also been a sea change in the manner in which M&A transactions are developed and negotiated. Now, with all the principal players working remotely, the effective use of new and collaborative tools and technology techniques have become much more critical as buyers, sellers, providers of M&A financing, and all their respective legal and financial advisors adjust to this changed environment. The pandemic has put a pause on a lot of M&A activity. That's a given, just due to the economic uncertainty. Traditional activity has been reevaluated. Alternative types have been suggested, such as alliances, joint ventures, special purpose acquisition companies, you name it. They've all taken priority, just given the survival world that we currently live in. However, the trend is changing. As I said, we're seeing a 33% increase from Q2 to Q3 in deal volume and 140% increase in deal value. Sales prices of businesses considered essential grew 20% in the third quarter compared to a year ago. But what are the major IT considerations that are associated with this trend? And that's why we're here today to talk to you a little bit more about it. So first and foremost, we're seeing cybersecurity threats as one of the top concerns for companies as it relates to deal making in this virtual environment. That's followed by the ability to forge relationships with management teams under this new and remote collaborative space we find us in, as well as extended regulatory approval timelines. When it comes to cybersecurity in the world, There's more work to be done. Now, I know CISOs, they understand how a data breach can negatively affect valuation and underlying deal structure itself, which leaving cybersecurity out of the picture may not lead not only to brand and reputational risk, but also significant and unaccounted remediation costs. So drilling back a bit further into the cybersecurity, right? We've got a case study here. We'll walk through here momentarily, right? So if you wind the clock back to 2014, we know that Starwood, a major player in the hospitality space, was hit with an undetected cyber attack. And this went on for a while. In fact, it was undetected while hundreds of millions of guests' personal data was collected by these cyber thieves. In September of 2016, Marriott purchased Starwood for $13 billion. In September of 2018, 2 years later, the 2014 Starwood attack was identified 2 years after the acquisition. In November of 2018, the ICO was notified of the breach. As we know, right? So the ICO's investigation found that the Marriott failed to undertake sufficient due diligence when it brought Starwood and should have done more to secure its systems. So exercising due diligence, maintaining our understanding of where we're at, key important attributes of the mergers and acquisitions space that we're in. Now, to make matters worse, according to research conducted by Harvard Business Review report, the failure rate for mergers and acquisitions sits between 70 and 90%. Woeful numbers. And so what does the company to do? How do they leverage IT to reduce their overall risk during mergers and acquisition? And why is IT even crucial for commercial IT or for commercial mergers and acquisitions? Simply put, 50% of all multi-enterprise integration activities critically depend on IT. Now I'm going to hand it off over to Steve Walker, our moderator, and we'll engage with our panel of experts to talk about best practices to help to achieve your goals on the next M&A deal. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Jim. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, great. So, according to Gartner, right, these are the five main categories of really the challenges that organization is going to face during the M&A process. So the top two here are systems and processes, and really that's around IT functions and processes, as well as infrastructure and systems that support the services of the business, and then cybersecurity and compliance. And those are the two that we're going to focus on today. And each one of these really we could spend a couple hours talking about, but then looking at asset management, data integration, and workforce, also key criteria. So let's open up the panel and have a discussion really on those first two topics, and really learn from your experience and get everybody's take on how to help organizations not suffer the 70-90% failure rate. So the first topic is around the due diligence playbook, and this is I think we've all experienced this when chatting with our clients or being, working with, folks in-house. Oftentimes, IT is left as an afterthought, and they're notified of an acquisition and are asked to integrate the acquired company in the next 60 days, please. But I think it's critical for organizations that are going to be acquiring and as part of their growth strategy to really to take some time and think through the due diligence aspect of it. So Eric, talk to us about some experiences you've had around organizations that have been successful in having a well thought out due diligence playbook, and some that haven't, and the impacts of that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I would say that historically, people who have done it well, organizations who have had some really good success right out of the gate during the due diligence process itself, engaged IT early, and they brought them in specifically to do a lot of technical discovery, more around the systems, the processes in which the systems are managed, and then ultimately the services are served, and then the people aspect as well, actually understanding the current structure of how this organization in IT works for whoever the acquisition is. And so the more salient the data is that this team can go ahead and actually extract from this new organization ahead of time will expose some key areas, and they do that almost repeatedly every single time, regardless if it's a single entity or if it's a big entity with multiple branches and multiple sub entities, et cetera. The approach is always going to be the same with these folks. And so the successful ones really kind of tackle that systematically all the way down the chain, and then are able to go ahead and devise 3 key areas typically. And that's, based on security risk. That's also an understanding of exactly how their network is set up and what they can and can't talk to. And the third is what types of systems that they already have in place, and including, contracts. And so there's a lot of really good information right out of the gate that you can understand and glean from an IT systems perspective to understand A, what it's going to take to integrate, B, what risk are you going to take on as part of this endeavor right out of the gate, and then C, really understanding who's who in the zoo, so to speak, who can manage it, who your team is going to have to interface with cleanly, and you have a kind of a plan in place that you can feed that data into. So those are the successful ones. The folks who are not as successful typically are typically rather new into the acquisition side of the house, and maybe this is their first acquisition ever. They've never been down this road before. They think it's going to be easy, saying, well, we've invested X, Y, and Z in our end, and we're just going to go ahead and tie these folks together, and it's all going to be hunky-dory. And it just doesn't work that way. So what they'll do is they'll kind of go in and they'll say, okay, well, how is your system like ours? And they look at it from that lens, and instead of actually just going out and seeing what the reality is. They don't have a standard set of tools that they use to actually derive this data. They don't really have a good methodical approach of how they're going to match resources together. And again, they're looking at it from the lens of their company. They're not looking at it from the lens of what this company has done to make them an acquisition target. Why are they interesting enough to have gone down that path? And then what in their system can we use? And then match that into some gaps that maybe we have. Or does it serve the IP that we bought? Whatever the case is, without understanding what that mission is going to be right before you even start meeting with these folks and start diving into to get details. You're just kind of swimming in lanes, and a lot of details are often missed. And so that's where people really fall down, especially with new acquisition targets during the due diligence process.
Yep. No, and I like that first point you made around having a scalable, repeatable playbook to go in there and do an assessment. I think the other piece is making the output quantifiable, so that the business can understand the output, right? And that's part of the decision-making process, and also part of the valuation. Right? Justin talked about different types of functions that need to be looked at, and different types of tools that need to be looked at in the due diligence process.
Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of different tools that you guys can really, take on in regards to helping along with a lot of that due diligence. I mean, at the end of the day, we're really trying to mitigate the risk that's coming into the organization from, this acquisition or this merger. So from, a technical aspect, there's plenty of different tools such as, patch management, vulnerability management, making sure that, the hygiene of the incoming organization is up to snuff, so that, the risk is mitigated in that place. When you start doing, discovery, trying to figure out exactly what is in the organization from an asset, from a security perspective, from a configuration perspective, from, policies and procedures, bringing those in is going to help tremendously, smooth things over and make sure it's a very seamless integration. Other pieces around that, one of the really major pieces there is, the asset management, understanding from an inventory perspective, what exactly are you guys bringing on board? Doesn't need to be replaced, doesn't need to be standardized to what is on par for your organization, and things really of that nature.
Yep, totally agree. And then really having that baseline to, measure where this organization is relative to where you expect them to be, and what is an acceptable risk that the organization is willing to take on. So no, yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Justin.
Absolutely.
Jim, I know that capacity better than most as the director of delivery. So talk to us about the impact of being able to be part of a due diligence in an organization or during an acquisition, and being able to plan accordingly, and how important that is.
Absolutely, thanks. And just to add to what Justin and Eric have already told us, right? So companies, mergers and acquisitions, very often, if you companies go into that space because they want to take on a bigger piece of the pie that they currently operate in, right? So they may acquire a similar company with similar processes. Alternatively, they may be looking to build out a portfolio in a space they want to move into, but they haven't necessarily done so in their own, right? And so they acquire a company that has completely different vision, business processes, value streams, organizational structures, IT departments, methodologies, organizational components, whatever, right? It's the entire laundry list that they bring to them. And so that just really emphasizes the need to ensure that this due diligence playbook is well-rounded. It brings up Peter Drucker's famous quote around culture eating strategy for breakfast, right? And so as an acquiring company comes in and they strategize and they want to consume or take over or bring on acquire a new company, they really need to make sure that they're bringing the hearts and minds, the tools and the processes and the people along the way. And all that has to be baked into that due diligence playbook.
Absolutely. So you're saying it's important.
I'm saying it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you really touched on almost all the other aspects we're going to talk about and how important it is to have visibility into all these different functions and aspects before you go into an acquisition. So everybody kind of touched on standards and how important that is. And I think it's interesting to, again, if you're in the acquisition space and, that's a growth strategy, I think that alone is going to impact really the standards that you're going to have as an organization. So Eric, talk to us about, standards as it relates to an organization that has been really focused on acquisitions and how, really cloud technologies have enabled those types of organizations to execute those strategies.
Yeah, sure thing. So standards in general, especially with companies that are, again, experienced, not only acquiring companies, but leveraging cloud to help the transition, help the discovery, help the onboarding, et cetera, do three things really well. One, they've baked in a approach to onboard entities that don't belong to them. They have rules already established to define the criteria of who would be integrated versus who would just be tied in as a guest or who would remain separate, right? So they understand, at least at a macro level, what they want to be able to achieve there. As it relates to service standards, security standards, things along those lines, they, again, have a defined set of rules and criteria that they would go ahead and compare and contrast the data that they've gleaned from the diligence side. And the discovery side, they would use that, compare it to, and look at, measure that against the standards they've already set. Basically have scorecards. So that's actually a really common tool to use to define who fits the standard and who doesn't, and then make some plans accordingly. The other side of that coin is that they're also really open to understanding that, when you get into the business of acquiring companies, especially multiple companies, oftentimes you need to adjust your standards, to be able to reflect the bigger picture. New technology comes into place, new processes, new IP that you now have to integrate and use. And so that requires oftentimes a different approach. And so being open to that idea and having a process as well, a standardized process, funny enough, to develop those changes is really key to organizations being very successful in maintaining those standards over time.
Yep.
And if I can, I'll just add on also, right, when we think about IT organizations in particular, with new companies or companies that are recently being acquired or in the process of being acquired, or you're interested in acquiring them, they may functionally operate in a different level or a capacity than the acquiring company has done all along. So for example, if an acquiring company acts in a more agile fashion from an IT perspective in terms of delivering products and services to their clients, and the acquired company is more of a waterfall shop, bringing them in and really changing all of those standards on them. You're not just changing standards for the sake of changing standards, but it's also bringing them along the way. And enforcing is a pretty big word, right, Steve? And making sure that you bring them along for that journey of understanding what the new standards are is going to be paramount to the success of the acquisition or the merger.
Yeah, absolutely. I the harsh word there is on purpose, right? It's so critical to have standards. So Justin, talk to us about why standards are so important and why we had to use the word enforcing.
Yeah. Enforcing is a strong word there, but I mean, at the end of the day, it is a important aspect of it. I mean, the standards are there for a multitude of different reasons. I mean, they're important through a lot of different aspects of your business. You know, from a technological standpoint, everything should be similar or the same, and therefore it's going to be more supportable and not cause as much complexity within your service organization, and then also you know, less specialized pieces that throw a wrench into what you're trying to accomplish and making sure things are efficient. So I mean, it's like I said, it's important through all the aspects of your business because you want everything operating within the same models or the same architecture. Things are significantly smoother. You know, if you have to make special cases or, you know, get out of those standards, you have to accept some risk there. There's potential delays in projects that are either in flight or coming on board from your acquisition. It can potentially cause inefficiencies in productivity. And I mean, it can make production and collaboration difficult. So, you know, having two manufacturing plants coming together that are on completely different systems, making them talk to each other in a seamless way and try to integrate all of those, you know, work in progress and inventory and what step of manufacturing a specific thing is in, all of that can be very difficult. So, you know, enforcing the standard is going to be essential in that case because it's going to make everything significantly smoother, a lot easier. And at the end of the day, it makes integration successful.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? And we go back to the earlier slide, you know, the Harvard Business Review quote, around 70 to 90% of M&A transactions failing entirely or to accomplish what the objective was, right? And I think that's tied back to, you know, either a lack of standards or being able to enforce those standards. And you know, that kind of is a nice segue into the next topic of enterprise risk and really the rationalization and the importance of the executive buy-off on the standards and integrating the two organizations, because at face value, it can look more expensive to integrate an organization than maybe to let them operate autonomously with the investments that they've made. So, you know, talk to us, Eric, about the key of having executive buy-off and having done the due diligence around rationalizing the cost to integrate these organizations and how that will expedite the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting executive buy-in right out of the gate is key in two fronts, really, almost universally. And one is it gets your internal team, the acquiring site, the ability to go ahead and march with the plans that have already been put in place. So you're backed by standards. You've already done your due diligence and in repeatable fashion, getting the data that you need to act. You've come up with a plan on what you want to do, right? And so there's some semblance of integration at a minimum anyway, as it relates to even just reporting structure, not even IT systems necessarily, but assuming that you want to go down the path of integrating or not integrating IT systems and that decision's made, communicated internally, then you also work with the acquired company and basically give them the same idea and level set of plans and give them the approach. And so anyone follows a strategy, anyone follows a plan, as long as it's well thought out and makes sense at the end of the day. So there's a reason this company got acquired, whatever that reason is, whatever the team decided to do in terms of integrating or not integrating, as long as that plan is communicated from the top down, and now the leadership in both companies are behind it and understand it, it makes the process of working together to actually achieve whatever goal that you set out to do that much easier from start to finish. That way you're not fighting any uphill battles, you're not fighting uncertainty, which uncertainty is always the biggest deal killer when it comes to any kind of integration project at all, whether it's mergers and acquisitions or otherwise. So having a real defined plan and sticking to it, and then following your playbook is going to get you gold, especially with corporate sponsorship or executive sponsorship from the top down.
And
Absolutely.
just to add to what Eric said, right, especially around value rationalization, many companies, they're not organized around value, believe it or not. They're organized in silos due to operational efficiencies. So when you're thinking about M&A transactions and putting together due diligence playbooks and enforcing standards, it's equally important to look at what the value stream is for that acquiring organization and how it's going to blend into the newly acquired or new acquiring company. And inherently, that's going to increase your enterprise risk. In fact, I would say looking at the other boxes on the screen, if you will, failure to tick the box on any of those is going to increase your enterprise risk overall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Justin, I think you were just talking about it really on the standard side, but you were touching on the ability to operationalize the technologies, right? So talk to us about having pet technologies impact on operations and how that can drastically increase risk and operational inefficiencies.
Yeah, from a technological standpoint, yeah, the standards really come into play here with the risk as well. There's a lot of different ways that we're able to minimize a lot of that incoming risk. Like I was saying earlier, in regards to doing a discovery, a security assessment, figuring out what everything is there, and then mitigating after the fact. Hygiene, making sure that patch and vulnerability management is in play, and continuing that. From an operational standpoint, a lot of that stuff, for the parent company that's purchasing, maybe some of that is already in play and maybe some of it isn't. But at the end of the day, a lot of that needs to be well documented, well published. The policies and procedures are well designed and obviously known by all and followed by all. But it really comes down to making sure that risk is mitigated. And there's a lot of different technologies that can come into play there with, Microsoft Intune, for example, pushing policies, configuration, applications down to the end users to make sure everything is standardized, going back to the previous point there. And then also just making sure those things are pushed across the organization.
Yep, no, absolutely. I think it's, all great points around the key to having operational standards and operational efficiencies. And then on the value rationalization side, I think a lot of companies get tripped up around the expenses associated with tools and technologies, right? And have a hard time letting go of that they may have just acquired, not realizing that the bulk of the costs in IT are around the operational efficiencies or inefficiencies associated with that, right? For every dollar you spend on tools, right, there's $7 that are going to be spent on the lifetime of supporting that. So I think that's a critical component for organizations to have a hard line that they are going to adopt the corporate standard and that the business has gone through that exercise. Okay, so everyone's favorite part about IT is the human capital side. So, Jim, you want to back to your favorite quote and dwell on that for a minute, how important it is to bring the culture aspect into an acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of us who have been in IT for any length of time know that culture is deeply rooted in no other place, but far more, even more so than in IT organizations. And when you have competing cultures clashing against each other or being brought together for the first time, it's the proverbial handshake in the middle of the intersection when you've collided with one another, right? So it's inherent with chaos, mistrust, misalignment on expectations and goals and values and everything we talked about. So OE, organizational change, and bringing that intentionally into an organization, unfortunately, all too often it's left as an afterthought. As organizations go through these major and massive changes, they just assume the humans and the human capital they bring with them will come along for the ride eventually. So taking an intelligent and proactive approach, and whether you're going to use ProSize ADCAR model or Cotter's 8 steps toward change, whatever your OE playbook of choice may happen to be, it's so imperative to bring that along for the journey, because you will have your strategy eaten for breakfast, as Peter Drucker says.
Absolutely. Justin, you've been through quite a few of these. So talk about the importance of getting in touch with the frontline folks that are touching the technology, and the impact of keeping them in the loop, or the issues caused by it.
Making sure that you're involving the incumbent IT staff is incredibly important. Especially if you're going to be, integrating them into the organization, bringing them along for the ride in the journey, how Jim was saying earlier. At the end of the day, a lot of organizations don't have good documentation. It's just part of how things work in IT, I guess, in this situation. So there's a lot of tribal knowledge there. And that tribal knowledge, you have to win over the incumbent staff. You have to make sure that they feel safe. You have to make sure that they feel important and that they're worthwhile and useful. Because if you do that, it makes things, again, significantly smoother when it comes to integration. All of that tribal knowledge is able to come over. You can document it. You can share it. And it at the end of the day, it just really pays dividends to make sure that the staff is there. But I do have an interesting story to kind of follow up with what Jim was talking about earlier in regards to culture. And it's no secret to my colleagues that I was a Geek Squad employee in my previous life. And, the really interesting part is that, I had a lot of friends that were very early employees of that. And prior to Geek Squad acquiring Best Buy, which is the joke that they always say, they were able to keep their culture. And the culture was that really like nerdy white tie, black slacks, black tee, and black shoes and white socks. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff really stuck with everybody, and it brought on a really awesome piece when it came to like camaraderie and making sure that people worked well together. So instead of when they were being integrated into Best Buy, instead of taking over that retail aspect, they were able to keep their culture. And that was incredibly important to the founder in that case, and made sure that the organization was awesome. So
you've come a long way since driving around a Volkswagen Squad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Eric, what are your thoughts around organizational structure in an IT organization, right? And the impact of, which path you take, whether it's centralized, federated, or however you plan to roll out your organizational structure, and how that impacts M&A.
Yeah, so understanding, the nature of M&A is now you need to have an organization and an environment that is structured in a way that can adapt and absorb, new resources, new capabilities, new technologies effectively. And so to do that, your typical siloed approach, if you are pure siloed in that nature, and you really choose to run your organization centrally and then top down, whatever the case may be, you at least have that defined structure. You know what the roles are, you know who needs to ingest what, and then hopefully work together. Well, structure doesn't always dictate or fit culture. And understanding the differences, what works for your company, what works for your teams the best, is really kind of important to understand. But then you also need to now marry these other resources together and see where they fit, because they may have a completely different culture, and you have to work together at the end of the day to integrate. You have to work together to achieve common goals, or even just to introduce standards, and then run autonomously otherwise, right? So but understanding that up front is really kind of important. As it relates to picking the right organization, it just comes down to what your end goal is going to be, right? So knowing that up front, starting again at the strategic level in the company, will help drive what type of pattern you need to fit from an organization standpoint to ensure that your resources are now both effectively producing the right way, but also set up to succeed together. as a team and as an organization. So it's an art in almost of itself to choose the right path, and there almost never is at any given time the right solution. It will change on you, and you have to be able to adapt. But as long as you do focus on culture first, I would say that it helps. That coupled with the outcomes and goals of the company itself and the organization, what they want to achieve, that should help you make the right choice. And there's a lot of pros and cons to each one, but really it just comes down to understanding how you can get the best effort out of your people, and the best output out of your people while they feel like they are working in a combined team for a common goal.
Yeah.
Best piece of
Great.
advice.
Yeah. So you're saying there's no easy button, and
No easy button.
no, absolutely. Those are all great points. Jim, talk to us about, let's think about an organization that is, again, a serial acquirer, and that this is one of their growth strategies, and the importance of having a dedicated team at the corporate level that can focus on the integrations process from beginning to end versus having engineers do this as a side job for their day job, and how that can impact the success of an integration.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So when we think about the playbooks they tell us how to do things, right? The blueprints tell us what we're going to do, who's going to do it, and when it's going to happen. And as we start to increase complexity in organizations, and we're moving, just think of it from a project to a program to a portfolio level of services and products you're delivering, having that single pane of glass or that blueprint that all collective parties and a dedicated group of stakeholders at the appropriate levels of the organization, and I'm not talking the engineers, right? They're certainly key stakeholders and subject matter experts that can and should be involved early and often in the development of these integration blueprints, but ultimately having executive sponsorship and helping drive that across the organization to ensure that it actually does play out the way you expect it to happen and when you expect it to happen.
Absolutely. It always ends up being a lot more work than everybody thinks it is.
Yeah.
So having that clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and cross-functional team that's dedicated to it really is the difference between it being a successful integration and it being a let's just let them operate autonomously, we give up.
Yeah, the majority of agile projects, they tend to fail because they don't have the appropriate executive level sponsorship. They tend to be more grassroots, or they've been delegated to some degree within the organization, pushed down of like, oh, just get it done, and all other assigned duties along the way, right? Executive sponsorship, and if you don't know who the executive sponsorship, you should be asking who that is, right? Because that's a problem. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Any other thoughts around organizational impacts or human capital strategy? I know that's a great topic. Okay, so we could probably spend an hour talking about integrations blueprint and really looking at the what the business does and how they do it, and the importance of having a great understanding of that for a successful integration. But yeah, Jim, back to you on kind of a not necessarily looking at it just from an IT perspective, but aligning that to the business value and what the business does, and talk us through that.
Yeah, for sure, right. And this, I mentioned earlier, right, value stream mapping is of utmost importance here, because it really is the tip of the spear in terms of where the company is looking to go and the products and solutions they are looking to produce or sell. And so thinking about how this is happening, not letting technology drive the business per se, but ideally the other way around, so that the business is working with IT to produce the value and deliver the value to their clients. And IT is not going to do that in a vacuum.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's IT is a critical component of that, but that really needs to be a business function, right? They need to own that, and IT needs to support that.
Yeah, some
But
of the best ideas come out of, and most innovative ideas come out of IT and the IT organization. But the best results come when the business is backing them and helping bring those to the market.
Yep, absolutely. Any other thoughts on the integrations blueprint?
Nope.
All right, we'll move on to cybersecurity and compliance. So, we've kind of touched on cybersecurity in every aspect of it, but, Justin, I'd love to get hear your thoughts on, what tools and what to prioritize during an integration, knowing that, you can't mitigate all risks during an integration, but where should organizations focus in that intermediate period between, when the company's been purchased and when they can, bless it as integrated?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to three different steps there. It's discovery, mitigation, and then monitoring or visibility in that case. At first, you want to make sure that you do a thorough discovery. I mean, that's assets, that's your security, baseline configuration, all of that sort of stuff to really understand what the company is that's being acquired, where they are in the maturity curve. So that you can understand then from that point, like what is the gap to get them to where they need to be. And where they need to be is what your organization standards are, going back to, one of the previous topics there, mitigating from that standpoint or remediating whatever you're able to do. Patch and vulnerability management, again, coming back to that same exact place, really understanding what needs to happen in order to get them to the proper location and the proper maturity. And then from there, that's the ongoing piece of monitoring and visibility, making sure that all the different steps that you took in order to make sure they are up to par for your company in order to start doing integration, that all of those things are being met and kept. So it really comes down to making sure that there's no, what do they call it, configuration drift, making sure that those things stay the same once you remediate them.
Yep.
Steve, I had mentioned earlier in the program around the case study and the existence of cybersecurity landmines that are out there that unfortunately you don't find out until after the fact. And nowhere is it more important than an M&A, right? When you're bringing in new companies, people, culture, processes, tools, systems, you name it, right? And trying to root out those landmines, right? It's the space shuttle disaster that was caused by an O-ring that was produced 3 years before the launch, right? It's that kind of thinking that you really need to go into and bring into these M&A acquisitions, right? When you're thinking about cybersecurity and everything else that comes along with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Eric, really during that integrations process, like what are your recommendations around, risk mitigations and like what needs to be in place and what do you need to prioritize, right? Is it around the network? Is it access or what other key technologies or tools or services need to be in place just to mitigate risk?
So one big component of this actually has very little to do with tools necessarily, and it's more around understanding the business itself. And that's really defining high value assets in an organization. So worst case scenario, which systems, which set of data, whatever the case may be, file share, could be a server somewhere, could be some sort of service that's SaaS based or on-prem. In terms of the value of data that system or service has in it, which one's most valuable to your company? So if you were to get breached, and if we're now to understand the importance of this data and the value of it, and say in the black market, if you will, per record, which systems have the most valuable data set. So understanding that, you basically then tackle out tools that you need to monitor those things. It really helps you laser focus in on what you need to protect first, second, third, and helps you automatically almost prioritize the output. So understanding that is a good thing. Now, what you're going to run into is that a lot of companies don't have any idea where their actual high value assets are. They know that they spent, $30 million on an ERP system, but they don't necessarily know that maybe it's half that ERP data actually isn't as valuable as your employee information in your HR system, for instance. And so really at the end of the day, it's just understanding and help them understand that, at least collectively put that list together and then start laser focusing on the right type of technology or tool or process that you need to bring to bear to monitor that, to A, put eyes on it, but B, mitigating the risks that come up as part of the assessment phase of your acquisition target. So that's a great place to start because that's really going to knock out the largest chunk of risk into your organization. The other side of that coin is, again, understanding things like patch management, endpoint management, what those outputs are, because again, just in sheer volume, that's another very large area of risk that you can at least get eyes on and come up with almost immediate plans to start mitigating. So having a strategy and a plan and attack around there, then that would be great too. And I think the third one, as it comes into this, and it's sort of actually a critical milestone for anything, is how well is your data protected? So do you back it up? Do you have DR capabilities for business continuity? These are all things that could potentially impact, the overall risk posture, if you will, of any organization, and understanding how to mitigate that, what tools you're going to have to put in place to get up to a right standard to protect that data is certainly clean. And so, backup being a cornerstone of this in many respects. Data is, protecting data is IT's number one mission in life. So how do you do that? How do you show that for a new site that you're bringing on board? And then how do you tie that in together to maintain your standard without, dropping the needle too much right out of the gate? So that's kind of where you start.
Yep. No, it's the basics, right? And it might not be the coolest tech, but getting good backups and validating backups and being able to recover, that's a critical part. So Jim, would love to get your thoughts. I know that you love compliance, but how compliance impacts organizations that are focused on M&A and how to, any tips on navigating those waters?
Yeah, absolutely. And compliance, just because it's last on the list here in this slide, doesn't make it the least important by any stretch, right? Inherently, companies are pretty good at understanding compliance and the regulations they need to follow in their given industry. But when they start moving into the M&A space, it becomes even more critical that they really understand it, and they're building that awareness into their due diligence playbooks, into their organization, into their integration blueprints, and so on, right? As their complexities start to increase and companies start to expand across their own state borders, if you will, potentially across the US, North America, and so on, the compliance conversations increase and they become increasingly more complex along the way. And it's not uncommon to have to pull in additional third-party auditors and assessment companies to help you navigate those new waters as U.S. companies start to expand and can cast their net of products and services across the pond, and they're fulfilling operations within the UE or Asia Pacific Rim countries, what have you. They're not necessarily going to have that compliance knowledge capital in-house with their incumbent compliance officers. So they're going to have to reach outside the organization and really think about it in the broader context in terms of what does compliance mean for my bigger, bolder company in this new and ever expanding geographical world that I find myself operating in.
Yep. And it sounds like those new compliance standards and controls may become part of your standards.
Absolutely. And this is important to enforce.
And enforcing those. Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, we have about 9 minutes left, so I thought we could just skip to the Q&A part. If we have any questions from the attendees, now is the time. I believe you could either chat them or you can raise your hand to join us. All right. It looks like we got one here. What is the suite of tools you recommend to gain visibility for your infrastructure? Justin, you want to give us a few technical tools to help gain visibility of
what were the suite of tools? Is that what it said?
Yeah, a list of tools.
A list of tools. Okay. I mean, there's plenty in the market. I mean, you could just look at the Gartner quadrant and just be, inundated with a bunch of different things there. But things that we've used in the past, what is that one specifically? It's
Net Detective.
Man, what's that? Oh yeah. So Net Detective is one that we've used in the past in order to gain visibility into Windows infrastructure, network infrastructure, things of that nature. Also, you can use incumbent tools, for example, with Cisco, Umbrella, or NetDisco is an open source tool that we've used in the past as well that has been really awesome and a significant part of our repertoire there. It's highly customizable, and you're able to utilize that in any way, fashion from a network standpoint. And some of the big name ones like Splunk, you're able to customize those in order to pull specific details that you need, either from a SNMP or from a Windows WMI standpoint, or Linux SSH, just to pull the necessary data that you want from a query standpoint. That's very straightforward as well. So those are a few tools.
Awesome. Don't want to lose our audience when we start talking about network queries. So another question, what would you recommend and how to manage third-party risks? Jim?
Yeah, great question. And they third parties are so inherent. They're just part of the deal. When you're talking to M&A and acquisition, you are going to find yourself in a world of third parties, whether you like it or not. For example, you acquire a new company and you find out that they have unique licensing arrangements in place with a third party that maybe you did not have in the house yourself, right? So there are going to be a number of unknowns that you're going to have to sort through and have conversations with them. And there may be some contractual renegotiations that have to occur along the way.
Sounds like it should be part of a playbook.
Sounds like it should.
Awesome. Another question. Where does TBC fit in supporting M&A activity? Justin, do you want to be the sales guy, or Eric, do you want to be the sales guy?
I'll let Eric answer this one.
Where do we fit in? So where we really kind of bridge the gap in many respects is we've, our teams have been through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, really help our customers go through them. And we're talking large global companies, that have, tons of integrations all over the map. And so, of course, with that, there's a lot of complexities around compliance, et cetera, but it all boils down to IT systems. So what we do really, really well is we basically take the challenges that a lot of IT organizations face as it relates to coming up and developing standards, implementing those standards repeatedly, time and time again, and then managing those transitions and the migrations and integrations of different systems and technology types. So that's something that we can take on for clients so they can really just focus in on the actual business output aspect of an acquisition instead of having to worry about the IT. So we can be engaged early on just to help with anything as simple as just the discovery phase, come up with some assessments, come up with that, some a good example would be a security posture assessment, for instance. The output that you get just from that exercise alone is gold as it relates to the discovery process, as well as also blueprinting. So being able to understand, where your gaps are, and then coming up with a roadmap on how to mitigate those gaps will really help you formulate that plan, for instance. So that, again, is something we can bring to bear at a pretty high level that gets you really detailed information and actionable information to make decisions. And then on top of that, we can then take on the monitoring component and actually help integrate those systems and manage that transition for you. So that's just one example of another area. Another one would be Systems Total Care. That's another product that we have available to us where we essentially can handle endpoint management for your acquired company, your company, or both, and then come up with a strategy to go ahead and make sure that we can integrate in between, et cetera. So there's just a lot of ways that we can play on the IT front that will add immediate intrinsic value to any organization going forward. And then the other side of that coin, at least at an industrial level, vertical level, if you will, is that we can take those results and that process and that methodology and repeat it time and time again. And so If there is a lot of opportunity in this space, and if you're a company who's going to go on an acquisition tear for a lot of other organizations in the same kind of market, we can take that similar approach. A lot of times you're going to run into the same types of tools, and as such, the same types of challenges. We already know and can continuously refine our ability to ingest faster and move quicker for you. And again, it takes the risk, it takes a lot of the uncertainty out of your hands, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Puts it on us, so we'll worry about it. That's why I don't have hair, and I think we're good to go. But I mean, these are ways that we can come in and help organizations start to finish.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think we're running out of time, but I appreciate everyone's contribution today. Thanks for the stimulating chat, and we'll wrap it up with our survey. So would love to get feedback from everybody on, are they in the M&A space? Where are they at in their journey? And would love to learn what you're doing well, what challenges you're facing, and see if there's an alignment with what we do and what your needs are. So would love to get some feedback there, but we'll be hosting one of these here shortly, and hopefully you can join us then.